I wish everyone a Happy New Year. Lori and I wish everyone a Happy New Year. You can't believe it's 2017 already. Just can't remember when we were kids how far away that would be. Uh, I remembered my first day of employment in New York Telephone Company, and they told me that my retirement date would be October the 1st, 2015, and I thought, my God, that's forever, and now it's come and gone. But this is the day that we in our culture celebrate the beginning of the new year, the ending of the old and the beginning of the new. And it's good that we do this every once in a while. It's good to to stop, to reflect, to look at where we've been, to look at where we are going. You know, we mourn the losses of 2016, the loved ones who have left us, the circumstances that have changed, the things that just are gone. They are no more. And we miss them. And we look forward to the new year, to all of the new people who will come into our lives, to all of the new adventures that we will begin together, to all of the magnificent ways that we will have an opportunity, and we will pursue that opportunity to discover the magnificence of God in us, as us, around us, and through us. Now, I just want to mention that this idea that January 1st is a new year, of course, that's an arbitrary decision, if you will. I mean, it could be any day of the year, and it is, in fact, every day of the year. And perhaps if we would keep that perspective in mind, that every day, every moment of every day is a new beginning. Every moment of every day is a new ending. Every moment of every day is a new beginning. Every moment of every day is an opportunity to grow in love, to grow in wisdom, to grow in understanding. But it's only an opportunity that is pursued when we are consciously aware of that. That is, when we deliberately, through our intention, through our attention, when we bring ourselves to the point of saying, now is the time. The famous quote by Rabbi Hillel, now is the time, we are the people. If not us, who? If not now, when? You know, and I wish we had the context for that quote. That's all we have from him. If not us, who? If not now, when? Now is the time, and we are the people. Now, of course, we can make that into anything we want, and we do. And I think that means that now is the time, and we are the people, to realize the presence of the divine a little bit more deeply this moment than the last, a little bit more deeply this day than the last. See, it's very easy to get caught up in the busyness of life. It's very easy to get caught up in the busyness of whatever it is we're doing. And that's why even in business we would have an annual retreat. We would take all of the executives off somewhere, somewhere nice, special, Pinehurst or Charleston, or someplace very nice. And we would spend time and we would reflect on, where were we a year ago? A year ago, where were we? And what did we say we were going to accomplish during this last year? And how well did we do accomplishing it? Then we would look at, well, what has changed? What in the environment has changed? The strategic planning people would come in and they would tell us, a year ago, this is the way we thought the world would look 5 years from now. But our view has changed. This is what we think it's going to look like now. And then everybody would have an opportunity to reflect. Each department would have an opportunity to reflect. Well, last year we said we were going to do this, and this is what we actually did. And we never said we were going to do that, but we had to do that because the need arose to do it. And this is what we actually did. This is what we said we would do, but this is what we actually did. And then we would look forward and say, based on where do we want to be a year from now? Where do we want to be a year from now? What is it that we're going to do this coming year? And always in that exercise, we would try to bring ourselves back to being grounded, kind of in the vision statement, in the mission statement. Why did we exist as an organization? Why did our organization even exist? What was its purpose for being? And how are we going to fulfill that purpose for being? How are we going to express that during the coming year? So we can take that over into our personal lives and say, is a time of reflection is good. A time to go back to the basics and ask ourselves, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? What is my purpose for being here? What is it that I said I would do this time last year when we got together this time last year? We talked about how we wanted to grow in 2016. How did we want to come closer in experience and in knowledge to the presence of God in our lives? How much time did we spend doing the things that needed to be done in order to have the growth and the experience that we desired? And of course, there's always room for improvement. We can always do better. So it's not about guilt. It's just about honesty. It's just about reflection. What did I say I wanted to do? What did I actually do? What did I do instead of what I thought I was going to do at the beginning of the year? What crept into my life that kind of gave me a different direction, took me away from where I thought I wanted to go? And how important was that really? How important was it really? Did I allow myself to be distracted? Which in many cases the answer is yes, of course. You know, something interesting came along, something delightful came along, and we went and pursued it for a while. That's part of life. But we must recognize that when we do that, we are not spending time, we are not spending attention to doing the things that we said we wanted to do, the things that we said were important. So in some respects, this idea that we come around to a new year and we stop once a year and we reflect is good because it helps us to be more mindful of the impermanence of this life. Time is running out, if you want to think of it that way. Not in a frightening way, not in a be scared kind of way, but in a factual way. The amount of time that each of us has on this planet is limited. We're not going to be here forever. We're not supposed to be here forever. But there is something that we're given the opportunity or afforded the opportunity to do while we are here. And that is to grow more deeply into our understanding and our experience of God. So of all of the things that we can do, you and I, of all of the things that we can possibly do with the time that we have left here on this earth, what is the most important? See, what is the top priority? If you're into planning your day, what is your number one top priority to get done for this day? I remember back in the 70s when I was reading a lot of motivational self-help books, pop psychology books. There was a story in there, and I think it was about Schwab. When Schwab took over, I think it was United Steel. Carnegie sold out to a conglomerate, and I think it was U.S. Steel, and Schwab was the head of it. And he wasn't getting the results out of his executive staff that he wanted. He had good people in charge of the different aspects of his operations, but the things that needed to get done weren't always getting done. So he called in a business consultant, and he asked the business consultant to go spend time with each of the department heads, each of the senior executives in this organization, in this conglomerate, and to come back to Schwab with a recommendation on how he could improve the effectiveness and the efficiency of the organization. How could he get more out of it? I mean, in business, that's always the case. How can I get more for less? That's what businesses do. So this consultant went around and he spent time with each of the senior people, the senior executives in charge of the different departments, and he came back to Schwab, and Schwab said, "Well, do you have any ideas for me?" and the consultant said, yes. He said, I have one. He said, I just want you to take this one and work with it. I don't want to give you too much. You'll get distracted. They'll get distracted if we try to do too much too soon. But for now, what I want you to do is to have each of them every morning, to have each of them make a list of the most important things that they have to do that day. Then have them prioritize that list of the things that are most important. What is the most important of those? What is the thing that ought to be done first? He says, and then have them stay with that task. Have them stay with it until they complete it. Don't get distracted. Don't move on to other things. But take that one task, which is the most important thing that they needed to do that day, and do it. And that was it. Schwab said, is that it? And I said, that's it. He says, if you have them do that, have them focus, have them prioritize, have them focus, have them stay on task, you'll see a turnaround in the way that your operations are run. So Schwab said to the man, he says, well, how much do I owe you? And the man said, I'll let you decide that. He said, I want you to try it for a period of time. And after you tried it out, I want you to determine how much you think that advice is worth to your business. And you just send me a check for whatever you decide, and I won't argue with you. Just send me a check for whatever you decide. And they tried it for a period of time. I don't know if it was weeks or a month or whatever, but Schwab, according to my recollection of the story, Schwab sent the man a check for $20,000, which was an enormous amount of money in those days. Okay? Just a simple idea. What is the most important thing that you can be doing with the time and the resources that you have available to you? And are you doing it? Are you doing it? And what is the most important thing that we can be doing with our time here on this planet? And to me, and I believe to those of us in this teaching, I believe that most important thing is to grow daily in our experience of God. To be just a little bit closer to God today than we were yesterday. Now, if we're going to do that, if we're going to be growing, if that is truly the most important thing to us, then we have to have some idea of, well, what is it that we're growing into? What is this thing? What is this thing called God? This thing itself. The title of today's talk is The Thing Itself, the first chapter into the Introduction to Science of Mind textbook. What is this thing called God that we're growing into? And what is this teaching, this avenue that we're using in order to have this growth, right? This spiritual practice, this understanding, this study called the Science of Mind? So this chapter, The Thing Itself, the very first chapter in the textbook, if you think about it, what Dr. Holmes is doing is he's telling us two things. And he's describing them both kind of vaguely by calling it the thing itself. And the reason for that is whenever we name something, whenever we in our culture, in our society, when we name something, we stop exploring other definitions of it. We latch on to one definition, we hold on to it, and that becomes our concept of what this is. And the word God is like that. When we use the word God on a Sunday, if there's 1,000 people listening, there's 1,000 different ideas of what that means. It's a very personal concept, a very individualized concept. But if Dr. Holmes had come out and titled the first chapter What God Is, well, people would say, well, I know what God is. I know what that is. I don't have to read a book about that. Why do I need to dig into that? I already have the answer. So they called it the thing itself, which kind of leaves the door open for curiosity. What thing? What is this thing he's talking about? Why did he call it a thing? So he's inviting us to begin anew, to begin the study of Science of Mind. And we every year in organizations that teach Science of Mind, it's a tradition that every year we go back to the basics and we start with the first chapter of the introduction, the thing itself. So the thing itself invites us to drop all of our pre-existing ideas, to start with a clean slate, to start anew. If you just suddenly woke up one day, if you just suddenly came into consciousness one day, and you started to wonder about this world in which we live, what is this? What is this place? How did I get here? We start to learn about the magnificence of nature. The sun rises every day. The moon goes through a cycle every 28 and a half days. The seasons change every year. How does that happen? If we just started with no knowledge, with no preconceived notions, with no bias, and we started to explore it, what would we find? How did this all get here? Was there a creator? Is there something that caused the creation? Did it just happen? If it just happened, how did it just happen? Deep, deep questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? So if we were to ponder these questions without somebody giving us a preconceived answer, we might discover something anew. We might discover something different. We might question, and in that questioning we might find, seek and ye shall find, kind of a thing. So Dr. Holmes, in writing out the teaching, I guess I just want to explain a couple things for people who may not be clear on it, or maybe new to us, new to the teaching. Science of Mind is the teaching. It is the teaching that Dr. Holmes wrote down. And he didn't necessarily see it as a new religion. In fact, he says that, it's a supplement to any religion. It's a way of just helping people think about religion. It's kind of a teaching, is what he called it. And he first set up teaching centers. It was a teaching institute, and there were teaching centers around the country. But it evolved. People found that when they got involved in this teaching, that they wanted to spend more time with it. They couldn't quite fit it in with their existing religious practice, and they wanted a more church environment. And what happened was the organization evolved from teaching centers to more like churches, more church centers. In the mid-1940s, remember Dr. Holmes started writing in 1919. First textbook was in 1926. The second was in 1936, the one we use today. But in the mid-40s, we had a very large influx of ministers from another denomination who, for whatever reason, left their denomination, came into Science of Mind, and they wanted to organize it more as they understood churches should be organized. So it kind of evolved over the years, and Science of Mind was the teaching, and Religious Science was the name of the organization that provided the teaching, provided the curriculum, certified the instructors, those sorts of things. And as it started to evolve into a church, people didn't understand religious science. They thought it was an oxymoron. How can that be? How can you have religion and science together? And it was kind of a stumbling point for many people. So eventually they changed the name to Centers for Spiritual Living. Centers for Spiritual Living is the name of the organization. Science of Mind is the name of the teaching. So in the Science of Mind textbook, in the very first chapter of the introduction of the Science of Mind textbook, Dr. Holmes writes about the thing itself, the thing itself. And in writing these 4 chapters, the thing itself, the way it works, what it does, and how to use it, these are the introduction to the textbook. What he was doing is taking the work of Thomas Troward's book, Creative Principle, The Creative Principle in Man, which many people find Thomas Troward difficult to read. So Dr. Holmes was taking it and kind of paraphrasing it. Right? So these 4 chapters, the creative process in the individual was Troward's work. So if you try to read Troward and you find that book difficult, go back to the first 4 chapters of the textbook. And basically what they're trying to look at, what both Troward and Holmes are trying to look at is, what is this thing called God? And how am I related to this thing called God? How does this thing called God work? And how does my life work? And, what is this about? Do I live in a spiritual universe? Do I live in a physical universe? Do I live in one that's a combination of both, or what? And all these kind of deep questions are addressed in these very short 4 chapters in the very short work, The Creative Process in the Individual, which is basically saying that you and I are part of this creation. We're not an accident of it, we are not a victim of it, but we are a part of it. And the way that it works is the way that our lives work. See, what is true of the macrocosm is true of the microcosm. In biblical terms, we are created in the image and likeness of the divine. In other teachings, we would say, if you look at the ocean and if you look at a drop of the ocean, you can look at the drop of the ocean, and everything that the drop of the ocean is some part of the ocean. The drop isn't the whole ocean, but the very nature, the image and likeness of the ocean is in that drop of water. So we are part of something much bigger. Now, again, just by way of kind of setting up these lessons, when Dr. Holmes discovered the works of Thomas Troward, when he started reading Thomas Troward, Dr. Holmes had been studying, obviously, for many years. He had read Emerson. He had studied with a Christian Science practitioner in Boston. He had read the writings of Eastern teachers, Sri Aurobindo. The work of Sri Aurobindo is The Life Divine. He studied with Emma Curtis Hopkins, in my opinion, one of the great mystical teachers of our time, who is called a teacher of teachers, and many of her students went on to found different organizations, Unity, Divine Science, Religious Science. Many organizations were founded by students of Emma Curtis Hopkins. And Dr. Holmes studied with all these people, had a very inquiring, very inquisitive, very curious mind. His brother Fenwick, in his biography about Ernest, said that their mother called Ernest a little question mark because he always had a question. And I think that's good. I think each of us should always have a question. We should always be asking why, always be asking more. But when Dr. Holmes found the works of Thomas Troward, what he got from Troward that greatly impressed him was this understanding of an impartial law in the universe. So to Dr. Holmes, this explained what the theologians call the problem of evil. And the problem of evil is basically this: if God is so good, why does God let evil exist? Why would God create us out of itself? Why would God create us and allow a devil to tempt us? Why would God allow us to make decisions that could lead to eternal suffering? Why do people get sick? Why do people die? Why do people suffer? Why is there poverty? These are the questions that are the problem of evil. And every philosophy tries to answer it in its own way. Every philosophy and every religion tries to answer that in its own way. In Judaism, we have the book of Job, which some scholars believe was the first book written, not Genesis, but Job, and it deals with the problem of evil. Why is Job, who is a good and righteous man, why are all these things happening to him? And that book is a book of satire, if you read that book. Now, today people take it to be literal truth, but it was a book of satire, and it was poking holes in all of the reasons that people give for why Job was afflicted by these things. And in the end, it just basically left and it said, we don't know why. We just don't know why. Other explanations are, well, through sin. Adam was created without sin, and then Adam sinned, and it was because Adam sinned that all of these terrible things entered the world, and God allows people to be tempted, and eventually the opportunity to be saved is presented to them. Buddhism will tell us, it's karma. It's the result of our erroneous thoughts, beliefs, and emotions, and our actions. And we do things that cause negative consequences in our lives. And that when we learn to stop doing those things, then the pain and the suffering will exist, right? So the first noble truth in Buddhism is that the world is suffering. Suffering exists. But then it goes on to tell us it doesn't need to exist. And that when we stop doing the things that cause it, well then it will cease to exist for us in our lives. And what Troward presented that Dr. Holmes grasped onto is this idea that we live in a spiritual universe, and the activity of spirit is thought. That is a mental universe. The activity of spirit is thought. And there is a law called a law of mind. There is a law that responds to that thought according to the belief, according to your belief. We're told in the New Testament, according to your belief, it is done unto you. We're told in the Old Testament, we are told, as you think and believe in your heart, not your head, in your heart, it is done unto you. And in Buddhism, we are told everything you experience is a result of what you have thought. In Stoic philosophy, we're told what the mind can conceive and can believe, the mind can achieve. All of these things are trying to tell us kind of the same thing that Troward called the law of mind, which is basically, it is done unto you according to your belief. There's a power in the universe that responds to you according to your belief. And Dr. Holmes used to open his radio show with that tagline. He would say, there's a power for good in the universe, and you can use it. That's the way he would open the radio show. There's a power in the universe that responds to you according to your belief. And that explains the problem of evil. Excuse me, or it did to Dr. Holmes. So he goes into the chapter. The thing itself. What is this thing? This God, this spirit, this life, this nature, this first cause, this principle. How could it possibly create us out of itself and allow us to suffer? And what he tells us is that bondage is not God ordained. The divine did not create us and doom us to suffer, but it created us and it left us alone to make the discovery that we are part of it, the discovery that we live in a spiritual universe, the discovery that for all appearances we are human, but in fact we are spiritual beings. And along the way, it is inevitable that we formed wrong ideas. It is inevitable because we have freedom of choice. It is inevitable because we did not come here fully enlightened. So it is inevitable that we would make mistakes. Sin is a mistake, missing the mark. We would make mistakes. We would formulate wrong ideas. And because it is done unto us according to our belief, and it doesn't matter whether the thing we believe is true or false, it becomes an experience in our lives. It becomes an experience for us. It becomes our reality, if you want to call it that. So if we believe we live in a cruel world, then we shall experience a cruel world. If we believe we live in a kind world, we shall experience a kind world. And Dr. Holmes tells us that this is necessary. This is necessary so that we could be individuals. If we all came in fully enlightened, if we all came in knowing everything that there was to know, we would all be exactly the same. But it is in this process of slowly discovering the truth, slowly discovering the way things work, slowly discovering what God is and what we are. in making those discoveries, each according to his or her own path, his or her own unfoldment, that's how we become individuals. That's how we become unique, you see. And in doing so, what is happening is each one of us is bringing a unique, individualized experience of God into consciousness, into our lives. You know, it's like watching, when we watch children play. You know, if you go to a daycare center and you watch children play, and the teacher might come and dump out a box of toys, you know, like little Lego blocks or something like that. And you watch the children start to put these things together, you know. And some will make a truck, and some will make a plane, and some will make a house, and some will make a boat. And each one takes that raw material of the Lego blocks that they get to play with. And each one creates an entire world for himself or herself. They take those things and they individualize the expression of them. It's all the same stuff, you know. It's just plastic blocks. But each one brings something unique. Each one brings something personal. They kind of individualize the expression. And you and I can kind of watch the children play, and we can just be entertained. We can be amused, you know. We can just see how precious the mind is as the mind expresses through each of them individually. So consider this, then. Each of us is discovering the magnificence of what God is in our own unique way. You know, the comparison, you know, some is a boat, some is a plane, some is a car. In our own unique way, each of us is discovering just how beautiful God is. And it is because the divine is living its life as us, that we are part of it, that it experiences itself in some unique way, in some wonderful way. So you might ask, well, what is our purpose? Why are we here? We're going back to the basics. We've got to start with the questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? Who am I? We talked about a little bit. I am an individualized expression of God. And I am in the process of learning that the I that I thought I was, the I that I was told I was from the time I was born, is not who I am. Right? That is a persona that I have assumed. But the I that I am is something so much deeper. The I that I am is part of the I that God is. The spirit that animates me was created by the divine out of itself. I didn't create it. My parents didn't create it. You didn't create it. But that which created everything out of itself created the I that I am, the big I, as opposed to little I, or the big self with a capital S as opposed to little self with a lowercase s. Who am I as part of God? I don't always act like that. I don't always remember that. But that is the truth of who I am. And because God is a thinker, I am a thinker. And because there is a process or a law of mind in the universe that responds to thought, it responds to my thought. It responds exactly. This is why it's called a law. It responds the same way every time. It doesn't vary, like the law of gravity. Very consistent. The law of mind is very consistent. So Dr. Holmes starts us off by thinking about this. You know, there is this thing, there's this something that is, and we can't ask why it is. There is no answer to that question, why it is. It just is. It just is. And it creates out of itself, and it creates by an act of thought, a mental process. It has created us by an act of thought. You and I are a thought in the mind of God. Before we were born, it called our name. Before we were born, it knew us. And it hasn't abandoned us. It is still with us. We can abandon by forgetting. We can turn our attention elsewhere. But it is always with us, nearer than our hands and feet, closer than our breath. So this thing that Dr. Holmes is talking about is God, By whatever name we choose to call it, it is God. And we, you and I, we have to come to some type of an understanding of what that means to us. See, it doesn't mean anything to God by what name we should call it. But it means everything to us, everything, because that is the starting place. That is the beginning. That's why the first chapter is the thing itself. What is your concept of God? Is God a kind, benevolent being, or is God a cranky old man with a white beard living in the sky? Is God the very the very air that we breathe in the lungs that breathes the air? Is it the consciousness that becomes aware of the lungs that breathe the air? Or is it some type of just impersonal law that doesn't know very much about us at all? Is it not at all? Is there not this thing called God? Does it not exist? And how would we know? See, how would we know that? These are the deep questions that we have to start our exploration with. We have to start by asking ourselves, what is this thing called God to me? We're told, excuse me, in the Eastern tradition, neti neti, not this, not that. Neti neti, not this, not that. And what they're telling the students is anytime you think you've got your mind around what God is, it's not. You don't have it. Neti neti, not this, not that. It is beyond the concept of the mind. Neti neti. It is beyond the concept of intelligence. Neti neti. And this is why it's so important. He's telling us to be like scientists. It's so important to always be willing to question, to always be willing to explore, to never think I have all the answers and there's no more to learn. How many people do we know, or times in our lives that we did it ourselves, that we think, well, I know all there is to know about that. I have no desire to go learn anything else. I have no need to go learn anything else. And of course, with the divine will, we'll never know. We will never know all that there is to know. We will be growing for eternity. We will be growing every day for eternity. We will constantly be becoming more aware of what the divine is and what the divine as us is. So what is our idea of this thing called God? What is it? Can we take time to get our mind around our personal definition? Can we take a day or a week? Can we take this afternoon and go read the first chapter of the textbook? Because it's probably the most important question you will ever ask and answer in your life. It is the equivalent of the executives in Charles Schwab's organization deciding what their number one priority for the day would be. Your number one priority for your life is to discover what God is, to catch God being God, and to discover what that means to you personally. What is God as you? What is God to you? What is God through you? So what Dr. Holmes asks us to consider, he says, in this universe, we look out at night and we can see more stars than we could possibly count. We go down to the beach and we pick up a handful of sand. There's more grains of sand than we could possibly count. There's more energy in in just a little bit of nuclear material. There's more energy than there is in tons and tons of coal. There's only 2% of the sun's energy that makes its way to the surface of the earth, and it sustains all of the life as we know it on earth. So we live in a universe that is abundant. We live in a universe that is powerful. We live in a universe that is harmony and order if we will just stand back and look at it. And yet we find ourselves weak, tired, and afraid. And what Dr. Holmes tells us is the science of mind deals with those questions, because the science of mind is the very study of what God is and what we are in relationship to God. So in that respect, the thing itself is both our concept of God and our study of God, because the two go hand in hand. So we start then with this premise that we live in a spiritual universe and that everything is spiritual. Money is spiritual because money is God's supply and action. Houses are spiritual. People are spiritual. Food is spiritual. A divine idea coming into fruition. You know, it amazes me that we don't stop to consider when we sit down for our breakfast. And to me, this is truly the idea of saying grace over a meal. We sit down to our breakfast and we don't stop to consider that what a miracle it truly is. And by miracle, I mean it comes into being by a process we don't understand. But very important, maybe I ought to clarify that the traditional definition of miracle is something that happens by divine intervention and is beyond human understanding. And of course, by that definition then, as human understanding grows, the realm of the divine is diminished. And this is why you have a war between science and religion that doesn't need to exist. Just as an example, in the Old Testament, after the flood, God put the rainbow in the sky as a covenant that he would never again destroy the earth by flood. Isaac Newton comes along, discovers the prism, and says, I can make a rainbow anytime I want. The rainbow is not a covenant of God. It's not a miracle of God. It's a physical phenomenon that's caused when light is separated into its basic colors through the act of a prism. And raindrops act as prisms, and that's why we get rainbows in the sky and on rainy or cloudy days, when there's a lot of water droplets there. There's a big problem when Newton came up with that, because the religious people felt that he was intruding into divine territory. Right? So God wasn't so divine anymore. This miracle that God did wasn't so much of a miracle. I think we have to move away from that. We have to get away from the definition that says that which we don't understand is the miracle, or that which we can't understand is the miracle, because someday we'll understand it and then we'll say, well, it's not divine, and yet it's just as much divine. It's just as much divine. How does the grain in the soil know to grow? What process gave it the intelligence, albeit chemical intelligence, but what power gave it the intelligence to grow? How did the grass know to evolve into wheat, into corn, into rice, so that the humble blade of grass can provide food for the entire world? We sit down to eat our breakfast and we have our oatmeal, and where did it come from? Through our little humble bowl of oatmeal, we are connected to all of God. If we will stop and think about it, through the egg that we eat, we are connected to all of God. But we don't take time. We don't take time to observe those things. They become too ordinary for us. And what Dr. Holmes is telling us is, it's a very simple premise that we want to start with, and we want to apply ourselves to, that we want to work with, and we want to practice. That's why he called the students practitioners. Licensed practitioners were official, but everybody who uses the law of mind for a particular purpose is a practitioner. And what he was saying is we just start with a simple premise that we live in a spiritual universe that responds to us according to our thought, according to our belief. That's it. That's the very simple premise. Right? So scientists start with a premise that they try to prove or disprove, a hypothesis. And we have a very simple premise. So how would we go about proving it or disproving it? So here we get into really deep questions. What is mind? We don't know what mind is. We all talk about mind. We talk about losing our mind. We talk about all kinds of things about mind. Mind your own business. But we don't know what mind is. He says it's consciousness. He's talking about consciousness when he uses the word mind. How do we change our beliefs? You see, what do you believe, and how do you know what you believe, and how do you change your beliefs? These are deeper questions, right? So to get into the practice of the science of mind, we get into the technique of changing our beliefs. And we change our beliefs, and we see the resulting change in our circumstances of our lives. When we do that and something changes, then we know that something's going on. Right? We can't see the invisible. We can't touch mind. We can't touch consciousness. But we can see that when we change our consciousness, when we change our beliefs, we can see that something interacts with that changed belief. And we can see that the circumstances in our lives change. That is the practice. That is the practice of the teaching. That is taking the teaching and putting it to work for practical application. And that's what he asks us to do. Now, sometimes people push back and say, oh my God, should we be trying to use some type of a spiritual power for material things? And his pushback against that is there are no material things. They're all spiritual things. So what we are really doing, what we are really trying to do is we are trying to get to know God closer in some particular way in our lives. Is it as supply? Is it as love? Is it as a fulfilling job? Is it just simply as a more intimate knowledge of the presence of the divine? It doesn't matter to God what it is, see? But we have to deliberately apply ourselves in some way. We have to use what we know. See, many times people sit around and say, I want to know more. I want to know more. I said, it's great. Are you using what you already know? No. Well, the way to more knowledge is to use what you already know. You have to take what you already know and you have to apply it. It is a building block, a stepping stone. You have to put it to work before you can move beyond it. Because if you don't, you just sit there stuck saying that you know when you don't know if you know, because you're not using what you know. So what he's inviting us to do is to go back to the beginning and start and say to ourselves, do I believe this? Do I really believe that I live in a spiritual universe? Do I really believe that the activity of spirit is mental activity or thought? Do I really believe that if I can find a technique, which of course the technique he gives us is called spiritual mind treatment, do I really believe that through a deliberate technique I can change my mind, I can change my beliefs? Or am I stuck forever? Am I stuck forever the way I am because that's the way I am? And of course he tells us in this chapter that our conscious deliberate intention can change our subconscious beliefs. So am I willing to get up in the morning and consciously choose this day, the most important things for me to do this day for my spiritual growth, to figure out what is the most important of those and then to apply myself to it until it's done? Can I put it to work in my life? Can I take the time for my spiritual practice of prayer, which is we call treatment, affirmative prayer, of meditation, of education, of reading, of listening to tapes, of simply sitting to be at home with our beloved? Can I do those things? Can I make 2017 a year of renewed commitment that this is the year that I dedicate myself to discovering more and more of the presence and the activity of God in God's universe, in this world, within myself, within all persons? Am I willing to take the time daily to do my practice? Am I willing to choose specific things to which I will apply the practice, the spiritual mind treatment, to see that it produces changes in my life because I can't argue with results? Am I willing to do whatever I need to do this year to grow more deeply in my relationship with God? So for the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about the other chapters in the introduction. A lot of these ideas are going to be repeated as they are very closely intermingled. We're going to be asking ourselves, you and I, asking ourselves, and you have to do it for yourself. I have to do it for myself. What do I really believe? What do I really believe? What do I want to believe? How do I want to grow this year? What am I willing to do to achieve that growth? And how will I know? How will I measure it? What results will be there? Will I see tangible changes in my life that let me know that I'm making progress? How will I know? Divine love has created each and every one of us out of itself for the purpose of discovering it in some unique way. And that is our gift to the divine, our uniqueness, our individualization. I invite you to consider making this your top priority for 2017. Be mindful at every minute of every day that you are in fact the love of God in action, and that the love of God is all around you, despite the appearances. It is all around you. And you wish to see it, and you wish to interact with it, and you wish to experience it. If we do this consistently, 2017 will be the most amazing year of spiritual growth we have ever encountered. And I believe it is for that reason that we have come. And so it is.